the starter's orders.
What's a race we have in prospect here? He's charging up the hill, this wonder horse. They're coming to the final fence now. He needs to jump on his line.
Welcome everyone to the first ITV Racing Vodcast. We're catching up with the current state of play at Tuesday, 31st of March. The pandemic, obviously in full flow with the coronavirus, has led to the premature end of the jump season. But to chat over a few things, current situation, the highlights of the season just by Kevin Blake, Luke Harvey and Ed Chamberlin. We're all social distancing. I can just about see Luke out there. How you doing?
Very good indeed. Yeah, I mean, like everybody, life's completely different. But I've still got a horse to do, like many of the stables. So he still has to be mucked out. He still has to be ridden. Obviously, the roads are, from a selfish point of view, the roads are much quieter now. And I'm just keeping busy doing lots of exercise. I'm in a very privileged position that, I don't really see that many people on a daily basis anyway. But which is no one wants to see me, to be fair. But no, so much as all the yards around the country, I'm just getting on with the business and looking after the horses, really.
Yeah, judging by your attire, potential comeback?
Well, do you know what? I have actually lost 2 pounds. I'm trying to do 30,000 steps a day at the moment, and I've lost 2 pounds last week. So, yeah, I hope to be down to your weight very soon. Well, my horse does, anyway.
How's things over in Ireland, Kev?
Yeah, sure, grand. Like I was saying earlier, it's not a lot has changed for me. I live in the country. I work from home by and large. Horses here, same position as Luke. Loads of jobs to be done out in the yard. Everything that's been on the long finger for months is getting done at the minute. So, not stuck for things to do just yet.
You and I, nice and casual. Luke in his jockey's outfit. You can tell he's the main presenter, can't you? How you doing, Ed?
Yeah, Richard. Do you know what? This morning, because today's the day I'd normally go up to Aintree, and today's the day I'd be excited about seeing you lot and having dinner with the Aintree crowd and what have you. And I felt a bit sorry for myself for about 20 minutes this morning. And then I took the dog out and I saw 2 people on our street heading to work in Southampton General Hospital, and it gave me a proper reality check. And Ed, stop being so daft. And we've got things right at the moment in terms of racing stopping, and all our thoughts are with the guys on the front line and the NHS and so on, and that's right. And I think it feels the right thing to do at the moment. But I also think in a few weeks' time, and it will be down the line, things and people's mentality will change. And do you remember on the show the other day, and you made those lovely words about the older generation enjoy ITV? I said that sport, as Hugh McIlvanney said, is a magnificent triviality, and it is in good times, in normal times. But I think in the next few weeks, it could become very important, for people's sanity, for morale, to give people some joy, for the economy, and also for mental health. And I think there will be a demand for a return of sport, and hopefully racing will be able to do that in some guise, which I'm sure we'll talk about in due course.
Yeah, we're obviously going to try and move on from the current situation in many ways to look back at some of the horses, some of the moments of the season so far, some of the controversies and some of the finishes. And I know you've all been contributing a little bit on Twitter with some of those names that have made your season. But we do, as Ed said, wish to put this in the overall context. We hope to have some fun and give you some enjoyment in the next 45 minutes or so. But our thoughts are very much with those with loved ones who may be ill and those that are dealing with things on the front line. So we just wish to put that in context. So without further ado, get a feel of what it's like from a trainer's perspective here. We're going to join our special guests, who's very much affected by the current shutdown. Our first guest on this podcast is a man we hope to speak to from the meeting at Furnace the other day. It was Noel William. Unfortunately, technology let us down then. Hopefully it'll hold up this. Very good afternoon to you, Noel. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm bearing up okay, thank you. How are you?
I'm not so bad. Now, you and I are pretty close to each other in terms of distance. We're more than 2 miles apart rather than 2 meters. But give me an idea of how quickly everything has come to a standstill from your point of view, with the season effectively over.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, racing-wise, it's come to a grinding halt, the same as everybody else. Not just trainers, but jockeys and media, yourselves, press, everybody. The only people that seem to be working overtime now are our sort of industry leaders and BHA and what have you, and NTF and PJA and all and alike, really. So, look, I've still got a number of horses here that need to be either wound down, ready to go out in the field, or kept ticking over for when we hope racing will resume. But of course, we're all a little bit up in the air as to when that will be at the moment. I guess we're all very hopeful that it'll be the start of May. I think probably most of us are realistic and think that it might not be, but I think we have to aim towards that. And I'm no different. I've got a few that'll stay on the go for the time being. But like I say, most of them are just being wound down early now, the winter jumpers, ready to go out in the field.
So finance-wise, in terms of, looking at it from a trainer's perspective, as a predominantly jumps trainer, you have club horses as well, but how serious do the next few months look if for any reason we're not sort of back up and running with a reasonable fixture list by, say, the usual commencement of the normal jump season?
Well, my summers are usually pretty tight anyway financially, because I don't have as many flat horses as I'd like to have. I've been trying to build that up over the last few years, but most of my owners are predominantly national hunt enthusiasts. So we're usually fairly quiet, but I think with it all sort of grinding to a halt and us having to close, sort of essentially shut up shop much earlier than we would usually, it's going to put even more strain on the finances during the summer. It's not so much the summer months that we tend to, with obviously cash flow, there tends to be a knock-on effect. So by the time we get to October, November time, that's when we start to feel the pinch usually. And I think obviously we'll have to accept the fact that it's going to be even tighter than usual. Now, obviously, there are sort of there's help from the government, the same as all for all businesses, and I've been in contact with my landlords, and luckily they sort of are very willing to try and help me out and take a little bit of pressure off there. So I'm hopeful. It's going to be tough, obviously, but I'm hopeful we'll get through it and come out the other side okay.
Noel, it's Ed here. I'm going to do what's been winding people up in the government press conferences of the evening. I'm going to ask 2 questions, which I hope you won't mind. The first question is, do you think it's inevitable, having described what you just described, that in this period we will lose some trainers will go to the wall? And secondly, will you have to furlough some of your staff?
Well, to answer your first question, yes, I'm afraid I do feel that there might be some trainers that'll have to shut up shop completely, and that'll be it. Because I might be wrong in saying this, but I would assume that the bigger trainers have a little bit more. The majority of bigger trainers would have a little bit more. They can probably take the hit a little bit better. They've got some cushioning, as it were, financially. That might not always be the case of necessarily size of trainer, but I would say the likes of myself, who I'm a tenant, I don't own my own property. There'll be other people, of course, that own their own properties but are mortgaged up to the hilt, and it's the likes of us that'll really feel the pinch. If you're a lucky enough trainer to sort of own your own place, or you train on your farm, or they might be able to cope with it a little easier. It's still going to be tough. It'll be tough for everybody, but they might just find it a little easier to come out the other side. But answering your question directly, yes, I do feel that there might well be some people that don't survive this, unfortunately. Your second question, furloughing, yes, I will probably have to furlough some of my staff, and it's better than having to lay them off or make them redundant, isn't it? So it's the best of a bad situation. But I think that'll probably have to be the case, because I simply won't have enough work for them, or enough income to be able to pay them myself. A lot of trainers are like myself. It's a little bit hand to mouth. We don't make any money out of it. I certainly don't. So there's not a lot. There's no cushion. There's no reserve.
I think the ironic situation is, Noel, that the biggest before all of this came about, the biggest sort of worry for horse racing was a staff shortage. And, you know, when you actually get, I know you've got some very good members of staff yourself, but to try and keep them going, if there's no work, obviously you can't pay them. But you see the situation, racing finds itself in a really bizarre state, doesn't it?
I know, it's ridiculous. As you say, you know, most trainers, I mean, I'm very lucky. I have a good nucleus of staff that they've been with me for quite a long time. They're older. They are reliable, and I'm not on the whole very short of staff. And I'm probably one of the lucky ones. But a lot of trainers, particularly the bigger yards, who need more staff members, struggle with that. Yeah, absolutely, getting enough people and enough good people. And as you say, we're now in a situation where some of us having to, you know, lay people off or furlough them or what have you. It is a strange thing to be having to do, and I'm sure nobody wants to have to furlough staff or lay staff off or make them redundant. I was talking to one of my owners just this morning, who she runs quite a large business, and she was saying she's literally just furloughed a few of her staff, and you know, it wasn't an easy thing to do, and but it's a case I have to, because if we don't, you go out of business. It's as simple as that.
No, thanks for your time. I appreciate it's a worrying period for everyone, and I think we all appreciate the efforts everyone is making to look after their staff, and hopefully your landlords will do the same for you. And thanks for joining us. So thanks to Noel. News in the last couple of racing days was the death of trainer Peter Beaumont. A really kind, lovely man, has been exemplified really by many of the comments about his passing. Best known for the success of Jadami in the Gold Cup. The horse also won 3 consecutive Irish Hennessy's. His success is coming in the early 90s. Obviously had a great strong family tradition as well, with his daughter Anthea running JJ Henry, who was the first over those big fences to taste success in the Topham, and the likes of young Kenny as well also advertised Peter's ability as a trainer. But as I say, you'll have heard from many of the comments, he was a fine man. I had some dealings with him in the early days of the Malton Open Day. He was always so courteous, gave everyone his time very willingly, and has been a fulcrum, really, or linchpin of many people's future careers. And our thoughts are with his friends and families. He was a really good trainer, wasn't he, Luke? Jadami was a fantastic horse.
Yeah, do you know what though, Richard? He was a very professional man, yet he still maintained that sort of rustic farmer feel about him. He was a sort of guy that would put his arm around your shoulder and just chat to you. But look, he got his horses very fit. When they were supposed to win, they certainly did that. And you mentioned JJ Henry. I can remember Anthea Morshead, who is now, you know, we see her quite often at York and Kelson, places like that. She was tiny, she like a pea on a drum on this horse, and he absolutely flew around Aintree. It was a sight to behold. And he was a lovely guy in his latter years. He used to go to Jack Berry House and go to quite a few local northern pointer points. He'd be much missed. Lovely man.
Proper horseman, Ed, and a proper stockman, really. That was in those days you had the crossover, didn't you? We had that Cyril Griffiths feature, and obviously Cyril was far less of a trainer than Peter was, but it was that ability to assess, you know, not just horses, but really typified trainers in that sort of period.
And I must admit, I've loved reading about him. I've never met him, and a bit young, Luke, for me to remember some of these things. But
unfortunately, not for me.
I do remember that the very first Gold Cup I ever went to was Jadami's Gold Cup, and he was just, as you say, a proper chaser, which I think is what Peter will be remembered for. And young Kenny again was a huge, great horse, wasn't he? A real stamp of a chaser. But Jadami, I'm sure, like many people watching this, had a very special place in my heart. And as you say, he sounded like the most lovely man.
So very sad news, and our thoughts with friends and family, but no doubt Peter lived a fine and full life and leaves many, many friends with very fond memories of him. Now, we're going to look forward, or look back, if you like, at the stories that made the National Hunt season. And we're going to start with some of the horses. Lots of you sent in various suggestions, and I'll mention several of you as we move through. But rather than sort of go through sequentially just as the season goes, we've asked individual people for some of their highlight horses. Ned, you've got to go first, and I think we're going to go to Betfair Chase Day for you, for one of your horses of the campaign.
Yeah, I think it's one of the stories of the campaign, Richard, really, with Lost in Translation. Brilliant horse that he is, with a really good trainer, but it's the owners who really caught the public's imagination. Particularly, and it's Luke who's told the story so well with Alice, really, of the Taylor family who own Lost in Translation with Richard, isn't it, Luke? And he's just been a brilliant horse for them. And they had this dream that came out of tragedy when they lost their son Charlie, aged 3, in tragic circumstances. And a while after that, they set about trying to bring some life back into their life. And the way they wanted to do that was to buy a horse to potentially run in a Gold Cup. Now, we all work in racing. How often does that happen? Generally never. And yet they've bought this horse, Lost in Translation. And when he won at Haydock, I found it really emotive, actually. He runs in the colours of Charlie's favourite film, The Minions. And it was very, very touching that day to see finally some joy in the Taylor's family's life. And then to go to the Gold Cup. And I thought, and I don't know what you guys think, I think their dream of winning a Gold Cup could still be alive, because the Tizard horses didn't run particularly well that week. And I thought Lost in Translation ran a big race. And I've just found that whole story this season. I don't know about you, Luke. You know them better than me. I've just found it very, very emotive.
Yeah, the backstory apart, Lost in Translation is just such a wonderful race. As you say, normally these sort of things don't happen. He was good enough to mix it over 2.5 miles with Daffy Desoy. He proved at Haydock that he stays as well. He was my fancy for the King George. That didn't go right. And you're right, when you say the Tizard horses didn't run very well at Cheltenham, they ran like drains. So you couldn't really fancy him for the Gold Cup, but he ran the most spectacular race. And he's a horse full of promise for next season. But yeah, he's just a wonderful racehorse with a wonderful story attached to him as well.
Moving on, we saw Champ at Newbury. Now, a lot of people have mentioned him in his horses for the season in that poll we put out on Twitter. Paul Cook, J Mac, Nick and Brendan were all very positive about Champ as their horses of the season. But it wasn't all positive. Simon Fitzgerald and Sean Lewis saying, how can you have the horse of the season when the other two fell in a hole up the running and he hadn't jumped a twig up to that point? It was a very up and down season in many ways for him, Kevin, wasn't it?
Yeah, he's been a fascinating character study his whole career, really, this horse. Though clearly there was a lot of expectation placed on him by the naming. You know, he has a massive pedigree. He is an absolutely gorgeous individual to look at. And, you know, you just get the impression that his connections the whole time have been doing their best to make him what he's bred to be, and that is a staying chaser, and trying to get him to relax and trying to get him to settle in his races. And he did settle that bit better over fences this season, but his jumping was just erratic at times, inconsistent, didn't seem to be the best at working himself out when he had to shorten into them. And it led to some pretty dramatic scenes through the season. You mentioned at Newbury the second day, it looked like it was all over, bar the shouting, and the horse seemed to run out, or Barry lost his bearings for a minute and almost ducked out on the run in. He's gone to Cheltenham then, and he looked like he was going well. He's fallen at the second last, taking an obviously fall. I was all against him going into the RSA, Richard. I thought the stamina test race represented, and the way Barry was going to have to ride him, and the test of his jumping and everything else, I thought it was going to be a big ask for him. And coming down to the final fence, I thought I got it absolutely right. And I still thought I had a chance to get them out of the frame, jumping the last. Quite
obviously, it's been a major story for us. And everything that's gone with the story. How do you sum up his season? Are you a positive, or do you feel he's just one of those horses that's a white knuckle ride but wouldn't beat Lost in Translation in next year's Gold Cup, for example?
Oh, I don't know where I am with him, Richard, to be honest. He surprised me, the RSA. You have to give him great credit for doing what he did. You also have to acknowledge that Manila Endo and Allaho went at it a long way out and gave Champ the opportunity to get back into it. But for all that, some were critical of his jumping in the RSA. I actually thought he jumped quite well by his standards. And look, all the ability is there. It's just a case of keeping him going the right way. Could he be a Gold Cup contender? The potential is definitely there, but he'll just need to continue to do things a little bit better, be a little bit more professional, and make Barry Geraghty's job just a little bit easier. So I wouldn't like to rule it out, but he wouldn't be top of my list.
Do you know what? Given that I've got one English O level, I can't really say this, but he's as thick as a plank, that horse. He's just dozy. He's got a massive engine under the bonnet. He's a very, very good horse, but he doesn't jump two fences the same. Sometimes he gets in really close, and he's a bit ignorant. Sometimes when he stands off, he just sort of steps to the fence a little bit. I wouldn't say he couldn't win a Gold Cup because he's got the ability, but he wouldn't be carrying out my money because I don't think he's a bit like Long Run. He'll learn how to get away with it, but I don't think his technique will ever improve dramatically.
Ed, we're going to move on to Christmas now, and it's easy, isn't it, to always paint looking back, rose-tinted glasses to the season as a whole. But I remember your disappointment, really, and take nothing away from Clan Des Obeaux. We struggled for viewing figures on Boxing Day that year because maybe field sizes at the highest level were exemplified by what a poor turnout it was for this year's King George in terms of numbers of horses, and hence how easy it is to sell to the public. And it's something racing possibly, still needs to be aware of. Absolutely
right. And I often talk about it, comparing ITV to the racing channels, if you like. And for an ITV, even Altior against Surname was okay in terms of interest. But a 5-runner King George for our audience is a bit of a turn-off, if I'm honest, Richard. And the viewing figures bore that out. You want 8 runners, you want each-way interest. Losing Thistlecrack as a non-runner was a blow because the majority of our viewers, particularly on a day like Boxing Day, will open the paper and think, right, this afternoon, right, we've got football, and we go, oh, wonder who's in the King George. They look at 5-runner field and they go, And which is why often I get wound up. What was the race where the Skelton horse got bumped up in the weights, having come a distant third? Was it in the Altior Surname race?
There was one that finished third, but it was Maracuja, wasn't it? I think later on in the season, where yes, he was the one that finished relatively close.
So yeah, we do need, for our audience, you do need to encourage decent sized fields when you can. And Clan Des Obeaux is a brilliant King George horse. Take nothing away from him because that was a stunning performance. We saw at Cheltenham. Cheltenham's not for him, but in the King George at Christmas, he's going to take the world a beating again.
But we were saved, if you like, from the racing day by the emergence of Epatante, and that proved not just to be a sort of flash in the pan in the Christmas hurdle, but of course a very decisive winner of the champion hurdle later on in the season, and very, very heavily backed on that occasion as well. So we should have taken some notice, and Epatante was the first time she really looked a champion hurdle horse.
Well, you say that, Richard. Did you hear what AP said on the podium after the champion hurdle? He says that JP said after she won the race at Newbury, the handicap at Newbury, JP had come up to AP and said, I think she might win the champion hurdle, I wish we'd known that at the time. And then at Kempton, she looked all speed though, didn't she, Luke, that day? I thought she might have had too much speed to win a champion hurdle.
Yeah, I'm lucky enough to see her quite regularly at home. Sophie Candy, who's actually clerk of the course, Henry Candy's daughter, but clerk of the course at Windsor, rides her every day. She's not easy. She's a flighty little thing, but she's as hard as nails, and she's really, really professional. It's one of those. Pardon? Anyway, look, normally you go to the.
You're matching your hat now, Luke.
You go to a champion hurdle, you go into a Gold Cup or a Derby, whatever. Everyone says, oh, it's open this year, it's a rubbish race. I think she was a good winner. I think she's the horse they've all got to beat next year, and she can only improve off the back of that. So I thought we saw a very good champion hurdle.
And on that, Luke, I know we're going to talk horses here, Richard, but Luke, I've got to ask you, one of the men of the last few weeks has got to be Barry Geraghty, hasn't it? When you think of the low he hit when he broke his leg, and you and I had a conversation and thought that might be it for Barry, and I know how close he is to your heart. He eats around that table with you, doesn't he? Just how good was he at the festival, and how much will it have meant to him?
He's very brave, but he's not brave enough to eat here, I promise you. He does sleep here, but no, I've got very friendly through him. Just chatting away. He rides out rides out for Nicky Henson, and I don't think he'd mind me saying, he was on the ground. The Bouvardere incident when he got beaten in a fighting fifth, when he had a lot of ground to make up, and things haven't been going particularly well for him. Champ falling when he had the race in the bag. So to go to Cheltenham, he is the man you want, stepping up to take that penalty in the Champions League final. He's a big race jockey, and he proved that. I don't think there's anyone could have given those horses that he rode at Cheltenham. I don't think there's the jockey alive that could have ridden them any better. And you cannot imagine, how the pressure that guy must have been under going out there. He'd never show it, never tell me. I wouldn't ask, but. It was, for me, it made the meeting. I absolutely love watching him ride.
I'm normally lucky enough to be at the meeting that I want to when we do ITV, but the one exception is always Coral Welsh National Day, when we're still at Kempton And Luke, you were down there this time, and for me, this is one of the stories of the season. You witnessed firsthand the success of Potter's Corner, a locally trained winner for Christian Williams, who trains his horses in a pretty unique way, in pretty unique location. And I know it's amongst your highlights of the season that's just gone. Yeah,
definitely. There's the backstory. Christian Williams, I used to ride against him, so I know him very well. He trains a place called Oldmoor by Sea, and it's rough and ready, yet so picturesque. And Christian's he's obviously got a big talent. And you go to Chetso on that day after Boxing Day. You guys are all feeling smug with yourselves at Kempton with a 3-man and a cat and the cat's board. But I'm down there at Chetso. It's absolutely bouncing. The brass bands are out there. Opera singers, they're singing the Welsh national anthem. Everyone's absolutely bouncing. We saw a brilliant local winner. I promise you, I'm trying to get Ed to come down next year, because it's just such a good story. All the Jonathan Davis, Gareth Moore, Alex James all have shares in this horse. And of course he was going to be one of the leading fancies for the Grand National. So it had everything. For me, it was definitely one of the races of the season. Lloyd Fear and Luca Viscogliosi, who sounds actually as if he should be one of those people singing the national anthem, both put Potter's Corner as their highlights of the season. Yeah, brilliant. But then we're going to move on to Ireland, Kev, and the build-up to Cheltenham. We had Sam Crow and Faheen. Fantastic race at Cheltenham, but they arrived at the festival in many contrasting ways, really. But I think we should pay a little bit of mention. Peter Fletcher, Christopher Keane, they both mentioned Faheen. Paul Robinson mentioned Sam Crow. It wasn't just about that race at the festival, was it? It was the way they plotted their way through the seasons and looked as if they might be on the decline at one stage.
Oh, that's it. Well, Faheen perhaps in particular, he's looked gone on a number of separate occasions in his career. And the decision to send him novice chasing as an 11-year-old rising 12 wasn't particularly well received, I think it's fair to say. And one can imagine the scrutiny and pressure that his connections would have felt having made that decision. He's never been the most fluent over a hurdle, kind of a clumsy jumper over hurdles. So it was nervous at times, because he's a real racing public horse, and everyone just wanted him to be all right, So having overcome a couple of scares early on in his chasing career, he went to Limerick over Christmas, and that was just a special day. He was meeting Sam Crow, and you hope, Faheen's been a rule breaker all his life, really, but the older a horse gets, you'd think the less likely it is that they're going to keep defying convention. But he put up a huge performance there, and the massive crowd there. I think they might have had their biggest crowd for an awful long time down there for that huge reception. I went to the Dublin Racing Festival. I think Willie Mullins had all the screws turned there. They saw that as the horse's big day, and but it was hard fought. But he went and won the Grade 1 there, beat the game, and phenomenal reception again. A really special occasion. And there was plenty of talk that coming up to Cheltenham that he might not even run. The vibes were Willie Mullins didn't really want to run. Rich was keen to run, and they gave him a crack. We'll reverse and build up the other one, because Sam Crow had his own share of adversity before he got to Cheltenham. A horse, the second coming of Jesus Christ, as he was referred to in some quarters at one stage in his career, went off the rails a bit in a second season over hurdles. They had big issues with his respiratory system. And look, Gordon Elliott did everything he could. He burst out a back door in his stable to give him a run in, run out stable. They gave him a few breeding operations, but his response under pressure a couple of times this season was found lacking in a big way. Again, there was doubts that he'd even go to Cheltenham. Gordon was saying, especially if the ground was on the more testing side, he wouldn't even send him. So he went into Cheltenham under a big old cloud. Faheen went in there on top of the clouds, but you were just wondered, could he maintain it? And they combined with Mellon, to produce the most fabulous horse race in Marsh Novices Chase, without question, one of the highlights of the season. They all had their go, they all had their opportunity. And Sam Crow was the one in a photo finish. What a phenomenal training performance. Genuinely very special. But horses aren't finding off the bridle like that. And you know that Connections have been throwing absolutely everything at him in terms of diagnostics, trying to get to the bottom of it. And they were struggling. But whatever happened, between his previous run and Cheltenham, they got that horse right for the day that mattered most, and he needed every ounce of it in the closing stages. So you just have to take your hat off to Gordon, all his team. But there was no real losers. Technically there was, but the front three in that race all came out with loads of credit. And for me, it was certainly one of the races of the season.
Ed, for you, do you think that was the race of the festival from your side?
Yeah, I do actually. I thought it was an absolute humdinger. And the best thing about it, Richard, is it had a commentary to match. It was magic. It had everything. And you had Ruby Walsh screaming at Faheen. He didn't know whether to cheer Faheen or Mellon. Then we thought Mellon had won. I almost needed the quote from me, Richard, there of Davey doesn't think he's won, but you did, a bit like Frankie in the Nunthorpe. But it was a magic race. It really was. It had the lot, and to me showed off everything that is great about this sport. It really did.
Yeah, very lucky to provide sign tracks for those sort of races, and that's the race that will probably live longest with me. Now, we could go on all day, but I want to mention a couple of the others that we would be remiss of us having they won major races at the festival for us not to. Politolog, Lisnagar Oscar's success, of course, in the Stayers, another success from Wales. Rebecca Curtis, Min, Honeysuckle, that fine tactical race. That probably was the most compelling tactical 150 yards, wasn't it? Benny Didier and Honeysuckle, when Honeysuckle was all locked up and they had her imprisoned, and she was able to squirm out and get the first run on Benny Didier. That really was a fascinating run. From a jockey's perspective, Luke, I know you weren't normally quite that close to the front, but you must have been very proud if you managed to nick up the inside on the home.
Yeah. Well, it's a case of Rachel's proved in the past that she can handle these situations, and there's no two ways about it. You do get jockeys that aren't as good on the big stage. Yeah, she waited there. The gap, it wasn't a little gap, mate. It was a massive great gap. You're about to have lost 20 lengths to go around it. But yeah, it was a wonderful race. And again, we went into it. Benny Didier only really had to turn up in most people's eyes. And I just thought she was beaten. I know she got that good run. I thought she was just beaten by the better horse, personally.
And we should mention Paul Townend's festival at that stage looked absolutely torrid, and yet, just over 2 days later, he was crowned champion of the meeting with 5 successes. And we want to end this section with album photo. Raj Kapoor mentioned it, Tony Fletch, Ollie Oliver, Robert Coyle, and Stuart Atkinson are paying tribute to the fact how rare it is, of course, for horses to win back-to-back Gold Cups. And even though the race itself, well, it was competitive, wasn't it? It was tactical in the sense they didn't go very fast. And maybe some people will feel that once again Santini was slightly unlucky. But to go there, win it twice, be brave enough just to give the horse one run like Henrietta Knight did. It was a fine training performance, and the horse goes back there, presumably next year, with a similar profile and maybe a chance of a hat-trick if we was able to get out of this current situation.
Yeah, you'd have to give great credit to Willie Mullins, to be fair. You know, he is a creature of habit. If something works, he's always keen to do it again, but it's so unorthodox, you know, to go to Tremor, you know, at that stage of the season and not run again until the Gold Cup. Something else. Tactically fascinating race. If you ran it again, you could definitely make a case that the result may have been different. Certainly, a stronger pace would have played to the strengths of perhaps more of his rivals. But it's not this, you know, album photo has shown that he's a very strong stayer as well. So you couldn't say that a stronger gallop wouldn't have suited him better too. So look, hopefully he stays right. And we can get back to Cheltenham next March, and he could be bidding for something. You know, he's already achieved something genuinely special, but to go there bidding for a third would certainly be one of the stories we'll be building up to for, you know, all through the entire week, no doubt.
And Richard, just a couple of points before we move on to the next part. Just the amazing moment for me after you talked about the Benny Didier honeysuckle moment with Ruby shouting, "Close the door!" at Robbie and Paul Townend. Ruby's tears after the Gold Cup for Paul Townend were really moving, and he really was properly choked up and unable to speak. And to see Townend then collect the Ruby Walsh trophy was an amazing moment, really. But then after that, at a Cheltenham Festival where the powerhouses did dominate, I loved seeing it came to pass when the Fox Hunters, showing the O'Sullivan family that
it's brilliant.
Dreams can come true, which I think is so important for our sport. The downside to me of the festival was just a bit that domination of the powerhouses, but that and Lisnagar Oscar and others show you that it can happen. And for the controversies in the next part, Richard, I'll just tee it up with this quote from Kevin Blake. Some connections of Irish trained horses are sure to feel hard done by in the face of harsh treatment. They struggled in the handicaps, didn't they?
Yeah.
Well, we'll get into that.
So that's what's coming up next is some of the controversies of the season. I just want to round off a couple of other people who texted us in with moments of the season that we haven't covered. Barry Pinnington, Pinot, Matt's friend. This is one for you, Kev. I think you might have been there. The Rabbits at Dundalk was his highlight of the season. I think it's fair to say that probably there are an awful lot of rabbits now at Dundalk, given the fact that we're not racing there anymore. And Goshen, we should mention Goshen finally, because Paul Maguire and Chris Collinson said that up until that moment, the worst moment really of the festival, when Goshen was decimating the field in the Triumph and came down, that several also mentioned how mature, how well Jamie Moore handled things subsequently with his use of social media and what have you, and how so many people are now hoping that Goshen gets a chance to right that wrong, if you like, because it was potentially one of the performances of the festival. So that's our look back at some of the horses and the highlights of the season. Next up, the controversies. So in the last part, we dealt with some of the horses and stories of the National Hunt season. What about some of the controversies? We're going to start with Luke, actually, because Luke, you were present at Ascot. Diego de Charmel and Capeland heading down towards the last. A 1-2 seeming assured for Paul Nicholls. And then one takes the other one out, and we had a long steward's inquiry as to whether or not Diego de Charmel had actually jumped the fence himself.
And the great thing about not only racing but sport, everyone has an opinion, and we all think we're right. But I was there, and suddenly sort of all chaos let loose. Bryony's horse Capeland came right across the fence and actually went through the wing. I wasn't sure. I kept changing my mind what I was going to do. I had Richard, our producer, on. Get him. What's happening? I was going. I don't know. I haven't got a clue. Anyway, so eventually, when you look at it, they made the right decision. That Capeland was disqualified. Diego de Charmel was the eventual winner of the race, and the BHA get a lot of stick on our program as well as from other people. But Simon Cowell, I was desperate. We were live, and I was behind the glass of the weighing room, and I could see Simon Cowell, and I'm frantically waving at him. He came out, and very slowly and succinctly, he explained everything about their decision, and really hats off to them, because it was so clear. A lot of people didn't agree with it, and I can accept that, but they made a good argument why they'd made the decision, and hats off to them, because they get a lot of stick, and on this occasion, they were absolutely spot on.
Although, Ed, you'd be one of those people that maybe feels that, when you look at it from a lay person's point of view, you might be wondering how on earth the horse that forces a rival through, outside the wing, is able to keep the race itself.
That was the difficult one to explain to a sports fan, if you like, a friend, how Capeland, through absolutely no fault of his own, gets disqualified. It's a difficult one. No, there wasn't, to be fair, a right or wrong in that. And Luke, I was at Wetherby that day with Andrew Thornton, Mick Fitzgerald as pundits, and I remember AP was there as well, and he came over and watched the race, and we were all looking at each other thinking, oh my goodness. Exactly, that was exactly the reaction. What the hell's happened here? And thankfully, I felt so sorry for Capeland, and Kathy Stewart it is who owns Capeland, and thank goodness that next time he came out and absolutely bolted up, which felt like justice at the time.
Yeah, well, I think that those subsequent events showed what almost certainly would have happened had the drama not taken place. I didn't agree with the decision on the day. I think when you read down through the interference rules in the rule book, I think the stewards could have disqualified the winner. It's I know you end up in a position where the third best horse on the day gets the race, and that would be seen as unsatisfactory by some, but you can't go taking out your nearest pursuer out of the race and not have a consequence. I think that goes against all fairness, but it was a fun debate at the time, and like Ed says, we did get a bit of justice the next day, but
Kev, then it was the rules that were wrong then, rather than the interpretation of
the
rules.
Well, no, I think you could have interpreted the rules in a way that allowed you to disqualify the first past the post. They did, they just ended up disqualifying Capeland for essentially taking the wrong course, but they could have said he was carried out, because that seems to me what was more what actually happened. But it did highlight a bit of a grey area in the rules. And I haven't heard anything since in terms of a rule change to maybe clarify what might happen if in the highly unlikely scenario something like that happened again. But something like that does highlight a grey area. I think the BHA have a job to go into the rule book and make allowance for that type of highly unlikely event happening again in the future.
Just very quickly, you're just missing a point slightly, because that's not really what I was talking about, because basically they've come out and explained their decision, whether you agree with it or not. As a regulator, they're never going to please everybody. So they explained it. So in some ways, it put that baby to bed, because from our point of view as a broadcaster, everyone knows what's going on, and no one likes. That's the trouble with racing. The intrigue, the things that are behind closed doors to people's perception of what goes on. I thought it came out, they told us, end of story.
Yeah, I think it was helped by the fact the first two were trained by the same gentleman as well, a bit like Cruising Emma and all those years ago in the same ownership. But I wonder if Paul might have been quite so, if not Nicky's supported in the wing towards the last. And that brings me on to Altior, because we've got this far in the programme without really mentioning him in any great shape or form. A season that was born out of frustration. We're going to look at one of the key races of it a little bit later on. But did people begin to get a little bit frustrated, Kevin, about the way some of the information during the course of the season was being filtered out to the public initially through a betting blog, etc., rather than through official channels? And that seemed to change. Nicky, to be fair to him, did change that on the build up towards the festival itself. But it was quite a story and quite a bit of disquiet. Privileged information, should it be being released in that manner or not?
Yeah, look, it's been an interesting debate, far long before this season. But I suppose Nicky has been the poster boy in many ways for these ambassador roles with bookmakers, and Unibet are clearly very keen to get as much value from the arrangement as possible. And maybe we're a little bit too keen to be the ones that broke such news. And I think, from all the debate that emerged around this case, I think it seems to have been quite widely acknowledged that isn't necessarily the best way to do things from a public perception point of view. And I think Nicky personally has probably had his head wrecked in a big way by this, and he might be overcompensating a little bit now. And we saw it in the lead up to Cheltenham. He released the news of Epatont coughing. I think if that happened in pretty much any other top yard, there wouldn't have been anything said. You can argue the rights and wrongs about that, but I think Nicky is just so worried about having a repeat where one of his horses drifts on the exchanges in an anti-post market, and it turns out that there is something there. He's so paranoid about that happening and not wanting to have to deal with that fallout again, that he's thrown quite a lot of information out there. So it's the rights and the wrongs, finding the right, where to put the line, the correct spot for it is a tricky thing. But incidents like we had with Altior a couple of times this season, I think everyone comes out knowing a little bit more about where that line is. So, hopefully this will be the last that Nicky has to deal with this type of thing, because he's had enough of it. He's had to learn the hard way on occasion. But by the end of the season, I think we're all kind of sick of Altior, the will he, won't he, will seem to go on nearly for every one of his potential starts all season. But look, it's a pity we didn't see as much as we would have liked to have seen of Altior this season. But he's not getting any younger, but hopefully he'll be back again next season and we'll see a bit more of him.
Luke, you're in and out of Henderson's a fair bit, because you ride out there, etc. And it'd be wrong to say it didn't have an impact on him, if you like, in terms of the way he was dealing with things. He was very keen towards the latter end that things were done correctly, but it was a difficult one.
Yeah, I think we're all probably in agreement that it was wrong to release the information through his blog, for a bookmaker's blog. I think everyone's in agreement with that, and I think Nicky is as well. So that has changed. But of course, punters thrive for more information, and then you start giving information. And then I heard loads of people in the press from when Altior knocked that splint go, "Oh, here we go again." Well, you can't have your cake and eat it. If you want the information, have the information. If you don't want it, don't have it. So sometimes I think he was being too honest. If you told everyone, every single, even an owner, you told an owner every time your horse went lame, you'd be on the phone to him an awful lot. I tell you that much. People don't realise an equine athlete goes lame as often as a Premier League footballer. You're pushing something to their limit. So look,
but isn't the point in that, Luke, that then there was a drift on a betting exchange? Isn't that more worrying?
Yeah, well, that is, but plainly that came from someone in the yard. Nicky, I'd actually ridden out the morning that I'd ridden out first lot the morning that all came about.
Was it you?
No, well, I did actually phone the head lad and said it wasn't me. because I was there sort of first hand when it was all going on. But plainly, someone in the yard had either laid the horse or backed top notch in the race. Look, you can't stop that. But Nicky had everyone in and said, "What's going on here?" Nicky's main problem is he's too honest. He's not. Anyone can take. He's not a punt. It's not a punting stable. But someone in there obviously leaked that information. I don't know who.
I mean, the key point, I suppose, for people will be, look, why do we put ourselves in this position? Why do we allow bookmakers to have ambassadors who are jockeys and trainers? Surely that's a conflict of interest. And so forget where the line is. It just shouldn't happen at all.
No, well, as I said, look, I don't think it was right to release information through a bookmaker's website. So that's, I don't think that'll happen again. But there's plenty of trainers that managed to do it okay. Dan Skelton with Ladbrokes. There's lots of different trainers with different betting firms. So hopefully we've laid that one to rest now and we can move on.
Okay, so let's move on to the next one, which is standing starts, which reappeared a couple of times during the course of the season. That's Kevin's favourite. Look at this, a great reaction. The first time it really occurred, I suppose, on the build-up to Cheltenham was in the Betfair Hurdle, when one of the leading fancies, a horse that had run the field ragged at Ascot before Christmas, Not So Sleepy, with a big bonus on offer as well of £100,000, I think it was, got completely left at the start. And for a front runner who likes to dominate, effectively his race was run. And that happened again to him in the Champion Hurdle as well. And that was one of several false starts in major races. Kevin, what's your views about the starting procedures as they currently stand based on what you saw at the Fox on this season?
Look, Richard, the current starting procedures in the main are very good. But there's just one flaw in them, and that is that when there is a false start, that it automatically goes to a standing start. And look, for most of racing through the season, this isn't a big thing. It's not an issue. It's supposed to be there to act as a deterrent against getting it wrong the first time. And by and large, it works. But when you put it into a high pressure situation, big fields, that's when the weak points of it are exposed. And, you don't get any bigger than the Cheltenham Festival. And we've seen it for a couple of years now. And this year, of the 28 races, 8 of them had false starts, including 4 grade 1s. And standing starts are just a mess. The horses aren't accustomed to them. You can see with examples like Not So Sleepy, where all chances lost at the start. You see horses shying at the tape. It looks shambolic. It is shambolic. And it's just not a great image to be putting across to the wider world on your biggest occasions. And we've had these procedures in place for 5.5 years. 5.5 years is an awful long time. And you just had to be in the parade ring there at Cheltenham, in amongst all the connections of the horses, and just turn around and read the room when there was a false start. These drive everyone nuts. Punters hate them. The racing public hates them. Connection hate them. Nobody likes them, and yet we're persisting with them. And look, the BHA, they were noble in their intentions by bringing them in, but 5.5 years is a long time. We're far from at a satisfactory spot with it. So my view is try something different. My view would be try the first procedure, try it again, and if anyone causes a false start the second time, they will know that there is a heavy penalty there in terms of a ban waiting for them if they break the start the second time. Give it a go. If it doesn't act as a sufficient deterrent, try something else. But at the minute, we're doing the same thing again and again for 5.5 years, and we're still getting the same frustration. Try something different.
And I would say to that, Kev, from the BHA's point of view, they are going to look at it in the summer, just as they did 5.5 years ago. And as they will tell you then, that was done in conjunction with the jockeys, with the trainers. They came up with this idea. My warning to you, Kev, with what you say there, having worked in football in particular, if you give guys a second opportunity, they will take it. And if you think 8 full starts at this Cheltenham Festival, if you have a second start like that, a second opportunity, jig-jogging in again, you'll get a lot more than 8. Because like footballers, when they sense a weak referee, will push it as far as they can. If jockeys get a second opportunity, imagine Walsh and McCoy being given a second shot, they would push that to the limit, and there would be full start galore.
Well, Ed, if there was a 12-day ban waiting for them and they were facing up missing the Grand National over it, do you think
that I agree with?
That, put that as much?
That I agree with. I agree with the punishment.
It has to be a big deterrent. If you're going to do it, if you're going to ask them, trust them to repeat the process the second time, there has to be a very serious punishment there for those that break the rules.
And I agree with that completely.
I was down at the starts for those early races on the first day. And I'm not getting at the Irish here, Kev. I promise.
Yes, you are.
They're not used to our rules, right? So not some of the bigger jockeys, some of the middle tier jockeys. Their eyes are out on stalks. This is their chance. I know. I've been there. I've been there and done it. Go to the meeting. I've got one horse that's got a chance. I want to get that good start. And I was watching them. Their eyes are glazed over. They don't know what they're doing almost. You start letting them gallop in. And then by the third race, they'll be flat to the boards. It'll be uncontrollable. I don't like the standing start, but Ed's exactly right. I promise you, if you went back to doing that again, it would get worse and worse and worse. It's not satisfactory, but I do not see any other way around it.
I must admit, I'm in your camp, Kev, fundamentally, but Robbie Supplewood, the chief starter, who's always really welcome to debate this. He really is very, very transparent. He will put his case quite vigorously. The belief is it would just continue to keep on happening, and it would have to get very penal in order to prevent it doing so. That's likely to run. And our last controversy, actually, and I'll start with you because this comes from one of your races of the season, the day of the race of that particular season. It was the yellow flag debacle at Sandown, the void race, the non-void race. The rules, were they communicated properly to the public? I have differing views on two sides of that, but it was a day again that took the headlines for the wrong reason, basically, and that is the main concern.
Yeah, we'll probably talk about that when I talk about one of my races of the season, which had happened earlier in the day. And the unfortunate thing was that the headline the next day was 7 jockeys get 10-day bans. Now, I've got a couple of things on this. I think my biggest bugbear is the same as you, Richard. And I stayed on after racing and wrote about it immediately because while Luke praises the information that we got after the incident at Ascot, this was the opposite.
Yeah.
The void of information was awful for the punters there that day. It was getting dark. It was the end of the day. Over the tannoy, nothing. Any information is better than no information in a situation like that. And again, fair play to the BHA. I think they've held their hands up with that one. We've spoken to them. Hopefully that won't happen again. Information is everything. Even if it's holding information, a bit like we do, we always say when we're waiting for news on a jockey, a horse, whatever it might be, we'll bring you the news as soon as we get it. Those are holding messages. That tannoy should have said just something. Keep hold of your tickets. We're looking into the race, whatever it might have been. The fact is they should and could have voided it straight away. And then I'd have liked the steward's inquiry to have been 48 hours later. But that's a separate issue. So information with one of them. The second problem it throws up, Richard, and this happens with steward's inquiries as well, this independent disciplinary panel are totally different people to the BHA. And they will continue to overturn BHA's decisions, be it on steward's inquiries and on situations like this, which gives the BHA in the immediate future really a big problem, I think.
Well, I thought
the jockeys got away with murder here, to be honest. I thought they were very, very lucky to get off. They know what the flag means. They saw the flag, they heard the whistles, and they kept going. It was pretty black and white for me now. If they didn't see the flags, they would have jumped that fence that was being bypassed. They should have all stopped, and they didn't. And they were very, very lucky to get off, in my view.
And they got off, Kev, because the BHA would have stood by their decision, but it goes to an independent panel. You see it differently, you get lawyers involved, and the whole thing changes.
Yeah, we have to have an appeal process. I get that. We've got the same issue in Ireland as well with so many appeals being successful. We've seen it with the handicapping appeals panel as well. You have to have the facility there for people to appeal. That's that's a big part of justice. But at the same time, I think they can seem to be on very different wavelengths at times. And I was very surprised with this one myself. You can argue that the toughness of the punishments and everything else, but there is right and there is wrong. And I thought the jocks were wrong here.
But is this another example of what we were talking about earlier? Diego de Charme, Caitlin, nobody really thought things through. These procedures had been given the thumbs up, both by jockeys and by racecourses. They're practiced off racecourses. But at the end of the day, is the fundamental question, whether it should be up to one man holding a flag and a couple blowing whistles to stop a race, or whether there should be something that's far more sophisticated, far more practiced, and far more obvious for everybody, whether you be viewing at home, calling the race, or riding in it.
I think about a week after that incident, there was one in France where there was a stop race procedure put in place, and they had the sirens, they had the flashing lights, as well as people with the flags. And that's one example of how it could be done. And we had a stop race procedure at Dundalk actually 2 weeks ago. Could have been potentially a very nasty incident. Gavin Ryan came down in the straight and was prone, and there was a. Let me think. There was a young girl, a very inexperienced claimer, riding the front runner, miles clear, and they did it with a flag. And thankfully, everyone knew exactly what the flag meant, and they pulled up on the turn for home, and the race was stopped safely. So, you're ultimately depending on your jockeys as well. Jockeys have a responsibility to know the rules, to know what the flag means, and to act on the flags and not be second guessing or waiting for someone else to pull up first. You should know what the flag is and act when you see it.
It really was a very sad incident, and we should mention in passing, obviously it overshadowed the death of Beaumont as well. It was a much loved horse and one of several horses, of course, that we lose each season, and we never want anyone to feel that we took that lightly, and as a consequence, it was a very unfortunate incident, just about the worst possible space on the course for visibility, just not actually paying after the top event. Okay, that's a few of the controversies of the season. No doubt you'll have your own views on them. We're going to follow this in our next part with some of the finishes, the 2019-2020 jump season. Welcome back to the Vodcast. This part of the programme is where we're going to choose our races of the National Hunt season that is sadly brought to a premature end by the coronavirus. Ed, you're going to go first. We've already given a little bit of a hint as to the day, but the day of the yellow flag debacle. Just before that, we'd witnessed one of the great races of the campaign.
Yeah, I put the Marsh up there as well. But I love this because it was young against old. It was a proper horse race with Defi de Soy bursting onto the 2 mile scene, really, with a brilliant performance. But Underso is just a horse I love, Richard. He went out on his shield, and it was just a brilliant race up the straight at Sandown. People loved it. It should have been all over the back pages the next day, but unfortunately the headline was 7 jockeys get 10-day bans, which is why I will continue to push for controversial stewards' inquiries to be delayed for 24, 48 hours. Just like in a big controversial football incident, a Cantona, whatever it might be, wait, let racing have the headlines, positive PR, and then dish out the punishments another time, because I love that race. It was everything that's brilliant about National Hunt racing, and those 2 horses got one of those special Sandown receptions afterwards. I loved it.
And we should throw in Waiting Patiently as well, of course. He played his part. He finished very, very well in third. We went to see him again, and it does remind us of the fact that Underso was able to go out at the age he did. He was pretty durable during the course of his career. We lose several horses to injury each season, both in terms of their career ending, sometimes I'm afraid life ending. But Underso was a fantastic horse down the years, and Defi de Soy beat him more comprehensively later on in the season in the Clarence House, when they probably didn't play to Underso's strengths. But at that stage, it looked as if he was going to be the champion chaser in waiting till it all went wrong. But those 2 clashes for you are one of the highlights of the season, yeah? Yeah,
definitely the Sandown one. The Ascot one, as you say. But listen, I don't think it would have made any difference if Underso had gone quicker. He wasn't at his best that day, and Defi was dynamite. So, and then Defi, the mystery of what happened in the champion chase. And it was a disappointing week for Philip Hobbs, really, with near misses and horses running poorly.
So we mentioned the Clarence House there. Luke, we're going to you next, and it was a race at Ascot early on in the season, the clash between the 2 highest rated horses in training, Surname versus Altior. Nicky Henderson says he regrets running Altior now, but that's because he was beaten fair and square on the day. Looking back, did it take their toll on both of them?
Oh, definitely. But just the whole sort of build up to it is, when you look back on it, it's even more extraordinary. I interviewed Paul Nicholls in September. He said, right, Surname's going to Ascot in November. Then suddenly Nicky Henderson comes up. And then all the lead up to, I can remember Ed saying to me, go and ask Nicky, is it still on? Is this big crash still on? And you're there, I think, what are these lunatics doing running the 2 best horses in the country in November, head to head? And I think genuinely Nicky Henderson got bullied into it by the press. We're all saying, why don't, what your Fury, Wilder, come on, get out there, take each other on. And in hindsight, it was to do. Ultimately, Altior was his normal sort of fitness for his debut, which wasn't fit enough. He was beaten 2 1/4 lengths by the better horse on the day. It left its mark on both horses. Obviously, we saw Surname didn't look right to me at Kempton. Then he took that awful fall. Thankfully, he got up okay, but that was his season finish. Alti, although it was a blessing in disguise that his wither played up, so he couldn't run over Christmas, because I can guarantee he wouldn't have run very well in the King George because it had left its mark. So, sometimes you can ask too much of these horses, and you only really want to see them on the big stage. Build up. Let's enjoy them through the season, build up to when they all meet at Cheltenham. But it was an extraordinary day. I was there watching them go around the paddock. People were staring at these horses. It was brilliant from a public perspective, but for the actual horses themselves, it turned out to be, I'm afraid, a disaster.
Of course, we were elsewhere, where most of us were up Betfair Chase Day, wasn't it? It was Lost in Translations Day in the Betfair Chase. But yeah, just the anticipation beforehand, I was drawn back to those sort of Corto Star Denman sort of eras. Now, obviously, this was a one-off clash. The two are extremely unlikely to ever meet again. But it did have that sort of tribal view, didn't it? You were in one camp or the other.
Yeah, but very much, you said, Corto Denman, when they take each other on, that's not at the biggest race of the season. They built up to it. If you fire all your bullets early, you don't get those sort of results later on. And I don't know. It was a shame. As I said, I was there for ITV. I walked up to the Winston coach and I saw Altior. He stood there. His head was bowed. He knew it's the first time he'd ever been beaten. And I don't care what people say. He knew he was an absolute broken horse. And as we subsequently know, it's broken Surname as well. I hope both those horses come back to be as good as they were. Only time will tell. But it was a wonderful place to be. But in the end, when I was driving home, do you know what? I felt sad.
I think, Luke, and I said this before the Gold Cup with Album Photo and why I was against the likes of Delta Work and others. With these chasers, for me, unless you're a freak, a Corto and Denman would be two, I thought, complete freaks. You get one big performance a season from a particularly staying chaser. But like you, Luke, we get one good performance from you all year, which is why you go to Chester with the Welsh national.
Obviously, mine's coming later on in the season. I suspect, but I don't know. No, yeah, they're like we've highlighted earlier on in the podcast how fragile these horses are. They've only got certain amount of miles on the clock. They've only got certain amount of big performances. It's frustrating. Best Mate was the same. We don't see much of these good horses, but trainers have learned over the years, you cannot run them like Martin Pipe used to, keep on and on and on, week in, week out, keep going for those different targets. You've got to put your eggs in one basket, target a certain race. Look, let's hope both those horses are okay, but it was, when you look back on it, it was an extraordinary day that those two horses turned up in November to take each other on in a sort of a Seabiscuit War Admiral head-to-head. It was incredible, it really was.
Yeah, that's what I liked about it, to be honest. In fact, we spent a lot of time talking about the Cheltenham Festival, but it provided a real kick-start to the season. It was a shame neither of them proved durable to kick on. It might have been that Altior was running over the long chips. See what Ed's thought of it.
Sorry.
What are you doing, Chambers?
I had to shut the door.
Actually, that wasn't the trip at all, because he wouldn't have beaten Surname over 2 miles. He's only beaten 2 1/4 lengths. He stayed on. He got every yard of that trip. There's no two ways about that. Just on the day, I'm not making excuses. He wasn't fit enough. He wasn't good enough on that day. The best horse won on the day. But I thought it was an unsatisfactory race.
Okay, so that's one of the races of the season. Surname versus Altior at Ascot. Kev, we've already mentioned the protagonists, I think, that are going to feature in yours. We'd had that fantastic reception for Faheen, but it was the clash in the marsh, yeah, at the Cheltenham Festival.
Yeah, I think so. It had. We've spoken about the build-up to it already. There was different reasons to have concerns about both Faheen and especially Sam Crow going in. So I know myself, I wasn't allowing my expectations to run away with me, because going in for me there was a distinct possibility that Sam Crow would run bad, that Faheen would run bad, and we wouldn't be left with much of a race. But as it turned out, the two of them brought their A game. Mellon brought his A game, and it just was a fabulous horse race. And just in terms of my own personal memories of it, I went down to the collecting area down at the bottom of the chute onto the track and stood up in that little mini raised area of seating they have there for the lads and lasses and the various connections of the horses. And it was a brilliant place to watch it, because Gordon's crew got really, really into it, of course, with Sam Crow and Willie's were getting so excited as well, and we're watching them reacting to the photo finish and everything else. It was just the response of the crowd every time Faugheen cleared a jump cleanly. He was getting a roar. It was just, there was a lot of emotion going on through the race, in the finish, waiting for the photo finish. It was just one of those that it really lifted you off your feet. So for all those reasons, that's hard to beat for me. That race was what the Cheltenham Festival is all about.
Richard, can I ask him now? This should have been in the controversy section. That's Kevin. That's you talking sense. I agree with you completely there. But this quote you wrote about with the handicapping before the meeting, I want you to explain, because you to me sound like a paranoid Irishman. You, Kevin, because let's face it, with the strength and depth that Mullins has got, that Elliott's got, those handicaps became boring at Cheltenham. They became boring after you told us that all this harsh treatment. The protectionist handicapping you now talk about, Kev, has got to be on handicapping those Irish horses properly, surely.
Yeah, Ed, I know it's easy to remember all the winners, but you forget all the losers as well. The Irish won 5 out of the 10 handicaps, which is broadly in line with...
In some of those races, they were having 3 of the first 4, 5 of the first 6. It was ridiculous.
They had 74 Irish trained runners in those handicaps. They had an awful lot of runners, Ed. And, the thing with Willie and Gordon is they have such depth of talent. And in Ireland, it's not a very big programme book. And all the good horses tend to get funneled in against each other in maiden chases. So you get situations where very good horses get beaten. And if they're in England, they'd probably be going around winning at 1-4 in novice chases and end up running in the Arkle rather than the Grand Annual, and the Supreme Novices rather than the County, and examples like that. But just because Ireland is so competitive, these horses, they go down the pecking order a little bit, end up in handicaps, and they're just showing on that particular day what they were all along. It's very good horses. So when you've top trainers throwing so much ammunition at these handicaps, we shouldn't be surprised when they do well. I think the cause of controversy year in, year out is just the hard to explain inconsistency of the way the British handicapper treats some of those Irish horses. Some seem to get very heavy-handed treatment for no apparent reason. And you'll note that of the 5 Irish trained handicap winners, 4 of them were given below average differentials compared to their Irish mark. None of those that were given what looked real heavy-handed treatment were able to compete. So, I think it's something that will carry on. I think it's frustrating. I know, especially when they're going and winning 5 out of 10, but that's no compensation to the guys that own and train those horses that be clobbered for no apparent reason. It's no compensation to them to see other Irish horses going and winning. They just want a fair crack themselves. So while it'll continue to frustrate people, I'm sure we will continue to hear more of this until perhaps the BHA can come up with a little bit more of a level-handed approach that everyone feels they're getting a fair crack at the whip with.
You talk some drivel, you do. That Sam Roy, it won 4.5 lengths in one of the most competitive handicaps of the season. He'd have definitely been placed in the Supreme. I mean,
I say so, but
he was thrown in, man.
But it's not like the horse was absolutely buried to get a handicap mark. He bolted up on his previous start, and the handicapper had to go with rating him. But like you say, he's probably a grade 1 novice. But if Willie Mullins chooses to run a horse like that in a handicap, the handicapper has to give his best guess.
Well, you can't win then, can you? You can't win then.
That's it, and you would be frustrated if you finish second to a horse like that. But it's these novices. And most of those the Irish horses that did win handicaps, they'd won their previous start. So it's not like they were.
I'd have won on them.
It's not like they were. What's the expression, Richard? Hiding their light under a bushel. It's tricky. It's not easy, but I would feel some sympathy for some of those that did get 7 and 8 pounds higher than their Irish mark for no apparent reason. But it'll continue to go on. It's hard to keep banging this drum, like you say, when they are having quite a bit of success in the races. But it gives us something to talk about and argue about. I love that.
Okay, I'm going to move on from that subject. And my couple of races actually aren't sort of big ones. They were ones that finishes that I kept you out, or were just really memorable ones. The fourth one was Old Greywood winning at Newbury in November at the Ladbrokes Trophy meeting, getting up to beat Kalashnikov, who looked as if he was absolutely at home. And got nailed on the line. And then a little bit later on in the season, I finished with the Caspian Caviar, the ill-fated warthog, who got back up to beat the spirit of the game. He always taught me the lesson that don't declare something a winner until you're absolutely sure, because the spirit of the games went past warthog and then absolutely emptied in those last 50 yards. So those are two dramatic races for me that will remain long in the memory, although I do agree with Kev that in the Marsh Chase was probably, for me, the big race of the season. Okay, so still to come, as we draw to the close of the jump season, a taste of what's happening as the flat season bids to try and get underway. Who knows when? We can find out a little bit more what's going on at Newmarket. Hopefully, the flat season will be up and running before too long. So to tell us what's going on in Newmarket, delighted to welcome Hayley Turner. How are you, Hayley? I'm
good, thanks. How are you?
I'm not so bad. I'm sure you're like us, you're getting a bit stir-crazy, but at least you're getting to ride out in the mornings at the moment. Paint the scene for us of Newmarket at the moment in the mornings.
Yeah, I do actually feel really lucky to be able to ride out, because it's good for the mind. You know what I mean? When you sort of get out and you are doing a bit of socialising without getting too close to anyone. But the trainers have been, really thorough about the whole thing. So I'll go in the morning. My horse will be tacked up, and you're only allowed 2 people in the tack room at once, and no one's allowed in the canteen. And then when you're riding out, you've got a string of like 30 horses, but they all have to stay 2 meters apart, which is actually a bit of a challenge, because obviously horses aren't machines. But we've managed it, and everyone's taking it very seriously.
And give us an idea of the quantity of horses that are out at the moment. I mean, what would normally be this time of year? Are we talking about half of them being out, with half as many people riding half as many lots, or is it a bit busier than that?
No, it's as usual. It's as busy as it ever is, because the time limit on it is a bit vague. So obviously they've mentioned about there might be racing in May. So the horses have to be trained as if it is going to go ahead, because you can't just stop them and start them really quickly, like 2 weeks before. So some of them are actually even going to be doing some work now, just in case. So it's quite difficult, but it's a bit like horses are athletes, and it's like, the footballers and the rugby players, they're all trying to keep fit and keep tipping over. So yeah, nothing's changed massively at all.
Hayley, two questions from me. Firstly, what are the trophies over your right shoulder there?
Oh, I'm glad you asked this. Do you know the silver saddle at the Gold Cup meeting?
Go on.
There's one. There's the other.
Very good.
There we go. That was
very good.
Yeah. Sorry.
And my other question was a serious one. What financially, what's it like for you and other jockeys? Are you self-employed? Are you the equivalent of a freelancer, I suppose?
Yeah, it's not worked out well for us, to be honest. The government funding didn't oblige to us. So if you're a limited company and you earn over 50,000 a year, then you don't get anything off them. But the Professional Jockeys Association have been really, really helpful, and they're doing their best to try and get us some kind of support from the levy, and we're going to know in a few days if they're going to be able to help us out. Apart from that, it's, hopefully we're relying on them to sort of get us through these times.
Kev, how similar to what Hayley's talking about does it seem to you over in Ireland at Joseph's? Is it similar? I know you're under sort of slightly stricter lockdowns at the moment.
Yeah, the situation at the minute is for another week and a half or so. We've basically been told don't leave the house unless it's absolutely essential, and those that are in jobs that are considered essential can go out. But like in a situation like my own, where what I do isn't considered essential, you're told that you can go outside to exercise, but you're asked not to venture any further than 2 kilometers away from your house whilst outside. So it's quite strict. We have guards on the road, stopping cars at checkpoints and asking them where they're going, and if they don't have good justification for being on the road, they're being sent home. So it's strict, but I think by and large everyone is playing the game in a bid to flatten the curve, as they say. So look, it's not ideal, but look, to be honest, Richard, I work from home. I live on a farm. it isn't a massive change for me. I'm getting a great amount of work done at home. All the jobs around the yard that have been put on the long finger for the last few months are all getting done at the moment. So I'm not getting too idle just yet.
And finally, Hayley, I mean, we've been talking about a path back, and obviously at the moment everyone is more concerned with the mounting coronavirus, deaths, etc., and that will remain the case, and the resources of the NHS being stretched to its maximum. But racing has come up with a plan to a potential resumption when the time is right, and that's going to revolve very much around regional centres and very much around Newmarket. What's the feel within Newmarket about the role they can play in racing restarting when the time is obviously right?
Everyone's behind it, and it's exciting almost for us to think that perhaps we could be racing in May, and obviously we need to get the government to approve. But I think Newmarket's the ideal place because so many horses in Newmarket, there wouldn't need to be any horses travelling. So many jockeys and trainers that they're not going to have to travel around, and it's not a contact sport either. And I think, wouldn't it be great if racing could, give everybody a bit of encouragement? It would be great for the sport. And they just need something like that, I think, to entertain them a bit.
Okay, have you had first-hand experience of what it was like in Ireland under those circumstances, more so than we did over here, really, because we never really got going before we stopped? Is it a practical? Is it a viable? Is it something that can see racing at the forefront of when it's right for sport to return?
Oh, definitely. Look, horse racing and greyhound racing are better cut out than most sports or industry to be conducted behind closed doors. And look, I know in Ireland, and from being at Thurles, in particular, everyone was just so conscious of the trust that was being put in them that they went above and beyond. And I suspect that would be the situation if and when we do resume. One assumes it would be behind closed doors or for at least some time. And I think if racing is given that opportunity and that trust is placed in them to get going again, I think everyone involved will be so conscious of doing the right thing that the risk will be absolutely tiny of any transmission of this virus or any spread of it. And look, there's far bigger things at play here. People are dying, etc. But we have to have something to come back to, and anything that can be conducted safely that generates economic activity, heading into what, being frank, is going to be a pretty heavy recession out the far side of this. We have to do everything we can to get them going. And I think racing has a very good case to make. The plans are very much in motion. And sure, look, when the government feel it's appropriate to allow these things to happen, and that's a very difficult question. I wouldn't like to be the one pulling the trigger on that, because it's tough to make that call. And at what point do we have to get to before we're comfortable with giving a nod to the likes of racing going ahead behind closed doors? But I think when that time comes, racing will be very well prepared to step into the fight.
It is a very difficult decision. I think crucially over the next few weeks is what happens in Wuhan, Richard, where you've got a place that's got back down to zero. What happens next? When they start to open things up and start to bring things back to normality, does the virus hit back? And that is going to be a crucial element of the next few weeks for me.
Hey, thanks for your time today. Enjoy riding out. Let's hope it's not too long before we can see everyone back in action on a racecourse, and keep your chin up. Hopefully you add to those trophies before too long. Thanks to Hayley, and hopefully we'll have plenty of memorable moments for the 2020 flat season to bring you between now and the end of the campaign. So, time really for a few last words. We obviously wish you all very well, wish you all to stay safe, and Kevin, wish you well over in Ireland, and hopefully those restrictions are lifted soon.
Yeah, thanks very much, Richard. But look, these are all difficult weeks for everyone, some much more so than others. But look, we'll come out on the far side of this, and in our own selfish little racing bubble, this absence from racing, I'm sure, will serve to freshen everyone up. Enjoy looking back at what we've seen this National Hunt season that we've just spoken about, but also look forward to a great flat season ahead. And with a bit of luck, before we know it, we'll be at the likes of perhaps Royal Ascot, York, and maybe even Glorious Goodwood.
It still looks like one of those things the kids eat, those flying saucer things.
Kev, put it back on. I need a photo.
There we go.
Luke, one thing we should do is obviously that it brought a premature end to the season, and it didn't really allow us to pay sufficient respect to Brian Hughes landing his first champion jockey title Obviously not in the circumstances anyone would have wished, but that shouldn't underpin the fact that right up until that point, it represented a massive season of hard work.
You know, I feel a bit sorry for Brian, actually, because it's gone totally under the radar. He was actually in front of Richard Johnson when, unfortunately, Richard got injured. He's the model professional. He's got no hobbies. He is racing just straight the way down the line. He's a superb rider. He's tactically, he's very strong. He's very, very stylish. He's got a monopoly on the north, and yet when he comes down, he's every bit as good, if not better, than the majority of the southern riders as well. Dedication is second to none. So, yeah, really well done to him. Obviously, hard luck to Richard Johnson. So I'll be looking forward to seeing him again when racing resumes. And if you just want a horse as well, I think there's an interesting one. Easyland, who actually won the cross-country race, won by 17 lengths. He's only a 6-year-old, this lad, you know. I know that's an extreme distance. He's won over 2. He's won over 2.5. I think he could be an interesting horse, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if he didn't make up into a Cheltenham Gold Cup horse. So that's just a couple of little reflections on what has been a very strange season.
You get out your colours before you go for your walk, Luke. Looks like we're waiting for you.
I don't know. I'm a bit sad I'm sitting in here my own racing colours, but you know, if you love the game, lads, you know, you've got to enjoy it, haven't you?
Ed, final word from you.
Yeah, listen, we obviously, it's fun just to escape, isn't it? A bit of normality. We all crave normality at this time, I think, is the best way to put it. And it's trivial talking about racing when we should be, you know, thanking NHS staff and anyone who's keeping the country going, whether you work in a shop or whatever you're doing. Thank you from everybody. But I just want to mention, Richard, the work Racing Welfare are doing. If you've ever had a job in racing, you can turn to them. And the Injured Jockeys Fund, who I'm involved with, if you've ever held a license, anyone there who is struggling at the moment, be it financially, be it physically, be it pastoral care needed, please pick up the phone. Those two bodies are incredible and they're there to help. So that would be my one wish for today.
And we'll close very well, which was something that I mentioned on the show. I mean, for the elder generation who are, you know, really having a hard time and potentially are isolated for sort of 3 months, be aware of the people that are close to you in your local community. Many of them have followed racing for years. You might find you had plenty in common with them. We're certainly talking a lot more to our neighbours who are next door and both in their 80s. They've lived in that house for over 55 years. And it's really important that they live through this, to live there for another 4 or 5. So wherever you're watching this, as Ed said, keep it in context. Stay safe, stay inside. The sooner we all comply with that, the greater the likelihood we can all be back sitting next to one another, cheering home the horses that we love on a regular basis. Thank you all very much indeed for watching. We hope to be back with you soon. In the meantime, stay safe and stay well.